All right, it is January 30th, 2019, and I'm here at Ted Awtrey talking to him today in Rodeo. And he has several generations of family in sort of this area. So, Ted, maybe start with, you said it was your grandfather or great-grandfather?
My grandfather.
Okay. Can you tell us about when he came to the area, where, and...
He came to the area in 1908,
Okay.
and he brought my dad with him, and my dad was born in 1902.
Oh,
So he was just a little boy then.
yeah.
And he came from Oro Grande, New Mexico. With he on his journey west, he stopped in Oro Grande, and he heard of Cloverdale, New Mexico, and you could dig a water well before breakfast. So the way you had to go to Cloverdale back then is you had to come to Rodeo and then cross the Pulencio mountain range and then go down to Cloverdale.
What was in Cloverdale at that time?
There was a grocery store that it was half in Mexico and half in the United States.
And so they came there, and what were they? Were they going to homestead, or?
Yes, they were going to homestead. And Grandpa was raised on a farm, and he wanted to find one of those water wells that you could dig before breakfast, and homestead that area. But when he got to Cloverdale, he found out that all of those homestead sites had been took up, and so he found a homestead site, and he moved in there and built his house, and then he started to dig a water well before breakfast. He dug 125 feet down, and he never did get permanent water.
Oh, so what did he end up doing?
He had water part of the year there, and the rest of the year he had to go borrow water from his neighbors. And the country was a lot wetter back then, and it had 18 or 20 inches of snow up Cloverdale all winter long. So the ground was wet for most of the summer. So he dryland farmed when he first got here. And he had a section of land that he homesteaded. And he right after he got here, he was still building the house, and of course Dad was about 6 years old, I think. So he heard bang, 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 bang off in the distance. So he ran down there to see what it was all about. And he came to this house, and this old man was outside. And he'd hear a bird fly over, and he'd pull his gun and shoot that bird. And if he didn't hit it in the head, it was a miss.
Oh.
And the man was almost blind, but he was going by the sound of the bird. And most of the time he did hit him in the head. So Dad came running up to him, and he said, "Hey, what you doing, mister?" And the guy jumped plumb out of his skin because he didn't know there was anybody around. And of course he could tell he was a little kid right away. And then Dad got close enough so he could see him. So him and Dad become real good friends. And he told Dad his life history, and he was back east, and a bully beat him up, and So he got tired of being beat up every day at school by that bully. So he took his knife with him one day, and the guy was on top of him, beating the tar out of him, and he stabbed that guy and killed him.
Mm.
So then he went home and told his mother and dad what he had done. And so they said, well, you better run. So he came to Texas, and he met a girl there, and he married her. And they had a couple of kids. And so then he was ranching, and a sheep herder moved in on his ranch. So he went out and he got in a big fight with the sheep herder, and he killed the sheep herder. So then he had to leave his wife and kids, and he ran, and he come out to Arizona. And he came to Tombstone because he heard there wasn't much law there. Mm-hmm. So he figured it was a good place to hide. And over there he was a freighter for a while, and then he bought a little cattle ranch, and then he lost the cattle ranch and he went back to freighting. And his freight line ran from Silver City, New Mexico to Contention. It was over by Tombstone. And his route come over the top of the Chiricahuas. Mm-hmm. Us old-timers call them Chiricahuas, but that's not the right name. It's the Chiricahuas. And so he moved into the freighting business, and so he came over the top of the Chiricahuas, and he came down into Contention. I mean, not Contention, I'm sorry, it was Galeyville. Mm-hmm. He came into Galeyville, and he delivered a load there, and then he came down kind of the way you come out of Paradise now, down that road. And it was a real narrow wagon road, and it come down right down the bottom of the canyon part of the times. And he had a 40 mule team.
So he was hauling goods or freight?
Yes, he was hauling freight. Just any kind of freight they wanted him to haul, he hauled.
Yeah. And there would have been mining going on at that time, right? So there,
Yes.
Yeah.
So he hauled all kinds of stuff. And he hated the wagon ride from Galeyville to where Portal is now. It wasn't there then, but it was.
He didn't like that stretch.
No, he didn't like that stretch because he had a 40 mule team, and it was a single lane wagon road, and he would meet another freighter on that road with a 40 mule team.
Yeah.
And the mules would meet face to face, of course, and then stop. So the freighters would walk up and they'd have a fight, a fist fight, to see who had to back that 40 mule team down the canyon till they could get by.
Now, just so I've got it right, is this your grandfather doing this?
No.
Or this guy?
This is this guy. His name was Morgan.
Okay.
He was known in Tombstone by the name of Jim Morgan.
Okay.
And on one of his trips, he was on the other side of the mountain in Turkey Creek, and he spent the night there. And the next morning, well, he had lost his mule, so he was out walking around looking for him, and he come upon a dead man laying out there. And so he went over and he examined the guy, and he recognized him. His name was Johnny Ringo. And so so then he had to go back, of course, to the Tombstone area and report it. He was shot, and the story got around that Wyatt Rupp shot him. And of course, Mr. Morgan was an outlaw, so he he kind of didn't like Wyatt Earp, and so that's the story he told, that he thought that Wyatt Earp shot him, but nobody knows for sure who shot him.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened with your grandfather? What kind of farming was he doing?
He was mainly raising corn.
Corn.
Yeah,
Yeah. And how long did they stay there? Did your dad then take over?
well, my granddad stayed there until my dad got, well, let me back up a minute. It was my dad's older brother got a homestead, and then after Dad got old enough, well, then he got a homestead right next to both of them. But he didn't have enough land there for a square mile of homestead, so he homesteaded another piece of ground about 10 miles away.
Mm.
And so then I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. In 1915, when Dad was just a little boy, Pancho Villa raided Columbus, New Mexico. And so he came from Columbus to Agua Prieta to raid Agua Prieta. You know, that's down by Douglas. And on the way across the mountains, they camped right there by Cloverdale. Pancho Villa's troops did. And they had a big fire down there, and they had a coffee pot sitting on the fire cooking coffee, a great big one, evidently. And so my uncle, my dad's older brother that I was talking about, him and his friend told me this. He said that they were sitting up on top of a little round hill that's just barely north of the border. And they seen Pancho Villa move in there and camp, his men did. So they put that coffee pot on, and Uncle Willie and this friend were kind of just teenage boys, but they was sitting up on top of the little hill there, and they was drinking whiskey. So my uncle said, "I'm going to shoot that coffee pot." And so the guy that was with him, he said, "No, no, 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 you better not do that. You might cause them to start shooting at us." And so Uncle Willie was kind of wild. And so anyway, he shot that coffee pot, and Pancho Villa's men started shooting and everything. So Uncle Willie and the kid that he was with, they ran down the little knoll on the other side so that they wouldn't get shot. And then they went home, and they never told nobody about it. This guy told me. And so then the next morning there was a ranch that's just across the border there, real close, at a place. It's called the Lang.
What is it?
Lang Ranch. It's a cow camp of the Diamond A Cattle Company now. Well, it used to be. It's not anymore. But anyway, then on the other side of the line, just right there, pretty close to it, there's a ranch house in Mexico, and there were some federal soldiers staying there, and so Pancho Villa's troops attacked that ranch house, and the Buffalo soldiers were camped at the Lang, so they couldn't do anything because it was in Mexico, but they lined up and in a formation along the border. And so Dad heard all the shooting, and he ran down there across the Cloverdale Flat. He and he wanted to see what was going on. He thought they were just practicing or something. And he ran up there and he seen what was going on, so he got all excited. And he was standing there watching it. And one of the Pancho Villa's men rode up to the border fence, and he hollered at Dad and told him, "Get away from here, kid. This is no place for a little kid." So then Dad ran back home. But when I was a kid, we were camped down there at that Lang Ranch building fence. And so me and Dad and my brother walked across the line to that ranch house and got acquainted with the people there. And so I got to see that house. And at that time, there was bullet holes all in the adobe walls. You could see the bullet holes still. And they had Dad said they had a woman in that house. She was the cowboy's wife that lived there, I guess. And so anyway, he seen them waving a white flag, and so the Buffalo soldiers told him later that the rancher had asked if his wife could leave, so they let her leave, her and the kids. So then, after they killed all of Carranzi's men, or that's what Dad called them, but they was soldiers, Mexican soldiers, and they killed them, and then they went to Agua Prieta and raided Agua Prieta. That store that I was telling you about that was there when Dad first came into the country, and my granddad and all, it was a long, right after that, I think, that my uncle and this friend of his were drinking, and they were just teenagers, but they were drinking anyway. And so they decided, it was late at night, and they decided, well, let's go down there and go over on the Mexican side and rob that store. So they went down there and broke in and robbed it. And they was going to get money and go buy liquor, but then they decided, well, it's easier to just steal the liquor, and there ain't no money in here, so we'll steal all this whiskey. So they put it in a big gunny sack, and they started back across the flat to just in the hills above that Lang Ranch where my uncle and aunt lived. And so they got too drunk before they got there, and they found a hole, and they put that whiskey in that hole and buried it. And then my uncle's friend, of course, my uncle, he didn't live to be very old because he died of lead poisoning. He got shot in the back. But anyway, when I was a kid, I stayed there at the Lang Ranch with that man that him and my uncle stole the whiskey. And that's all me and him did was look for that whiskey, and we never found it.
I was going to say, they were probably so drunk they couldn't remember where they put it.
They couldn't remember where they put it. And he said him and Uncle Willie looked for days for that.
Oh, what a different time it was back then. It's hard
Yes,
to
it was.
imagine.
There was no border fence back then.
Yeah.
It was just markers.
Yeah, man. So did you, where did you grow up then?
I grew up
When you were a kid,
when I was a kid and I was going to school. I lived at the white place. It was right next to the Old Flash Railroad Station. And the white place was homesteaded by the White family, I believe, in the 1850s. And then they lived there for years, and they had a store there. And that's what we lived in, was the old grocery store.
Now, where is that? Could I go there today? Where is that?
You can go, you go to Animas, and have you been to Head Cheetah?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the old stock pins there?
Mm-hmm.
My dad built those, by the way.
Mm.
But anyway, then just barely east of there was where the old place station was. And then the white place, the white store
Mm-hmm.
was just about probably 100 yards south of there.
Mm-hmm. Was it painted white? Is that no? The family was
The
white.
family,
Yeah.
their name was White.
Yeah. 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 And so, was your family ranching, farming? What was
At that time, my dad worked for the Diamond A's. The Diamond A's owned that part of the country at that time. And so he worked for them, and he lived there at that old white store so I could go to school.
Mm.
Well, almost all of the kids went to school there.
Mm.
When we first moved in there, the old railroad station was there, so I got to play with plenty of kids.
Mm.
And
Because there were families there that
Mhm.
worked the railroad.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then when the railroad shut down and went out, well, I didn't have anybody to play with. So before even the railroad moved out, I'd been riding my dad's donkeys. He had 5 of them that he used to pack post and wire with to build fence. And he let me ride one of them. And when I was real little, I couldn't even reach the ground, and I had to crawl up the side of the donkey that he let me ride and get on. And so then I'd sit there and I'd kick and kick and kick and spur, and she wouldn't go anywhere.
You were too small.
Yeah, so then I'd get off and I'd go to the kitchen window, and we didn't have screens on the windows. So I'd go to the kitchen window and I'd look and see, because most of the time my older sisters had a pan of baking powder biscuits right there. So then if I wanted to go up to the railroad crossing from the house, well, I'd get one biscuit, and I'd get 2 biscuits, and I'd give her one, and then I'd give the donkey one, and then she'd take off, and we'd head up to that crossing. And when we got there, well, then she wouldn't go quite there. She'd stop just before she got there. So then I'd have to feed her another biscuit, and she'd go on up there.
Mm-hmm.
And then she'd turn around and she'd gallop all the way back. And she'd, that was my entertainment. And then as I got a little bit older, well, they let me go down south of the house to the Plash Lake on her. And the way I got there is I'd have to steal 3 biscuits from them, because that was 3 miles. Well, 4 biscuits. I'd have to give her a biscuit before she'd go. And then we'd go about a mile to the end of the pasture where we kept them milk cows. She'd freeze up again. She wouldn't go anywhere, so I'd have to feed her another biscuit. She'd turn her head around and get that biscuit too. She was glad for it.
So you were going to, there was a natural lake there, or what? Yeah.
Yes. It was dry most of the time. And so then I'd give her that biscuit, and she'd go another mile. And she knew where that was. It was by an old homestead, so she'd just stop there. And so she'd turn her head around, and I'd give her another biscuit. And then we went on down to the lake, and there was a water in there called the Adams Water. And when we got there, I had to give her another biscuit. And so then I'd have to tie her real hard to to a tree that was there, and then I'd get in the drinking place that the cattle drink water out of, and I'd go swimming in there during the summer.
Yeah.
During the winter, of course, it was too cold, and I didn't.
Yeah.
But I'd go wading even in the winter.
Yeah.
And then I'd get on her first, and then she'd go up next to the tree where I could get the bridle reins again. And then she'd take the bit in her mouth, and she'd head for the house, and she'd gallop all the way to the house. Oh, me and Nellie had lots of adventures. That was, my donkey's name was Nellie. And we had lots of adventures. Those are the only two places that she'd let me go, though. Other than down in the pasture where we kept her, I could go down there with her. But then I had to have biscuits before she'd go down there. And then sometimes when Nellie wouldn't let me catch her, she just wasn't in the mood, so I couldn't catch her. So then what I would do is I would walk down to the Adams mill. And if it was summer, I'd go swimming. And I got to where I kind of liked that because I didn't have to worry about Nellie getting loose and coming home. At that time, there was a lot of illegals coming out of Mexico, but they were good people.
So we think that's sort of, or at least I guess I do, sort of a new thing, but it's been happening for a long time.
Yes, it has. It's been happening for a long time.
And what you said, they were nice people.
Yes.
Tell me about the folks that you saw that were coming from Mexico.
Well, about 50 of them a day they would come to our house because we always had a pot of pinto beans on the stove, and they knew they could get a meal, so they would chop wood or something. We'd be in the house and we could hear them chopping wood, and we'd go out and there'd be a group of them there, and so we'd invite them in, and they'd sit around the table and eat and visit for a while, and then they'd go on. And so when I was about 5 years old, well, the Border Patrol got onto it, and they would come by the house, and they'd sit there and watch the house and all that. And so those people were good people, so I didn't like the Border Patrol. I thought they was bad people. So then I would walk about halfway up to the railroad crossing on our road, and I'd walk across the road barefoot and head south. And then I'd make a big circle and walk in the grass and stuff so they couldn't trail me. And I'd come back to the house. And then I'd put on a pair of my shoes and I'd do the same thing. And then I'd put on a pair of my sister's shoes and do the same thing. And so they thought there was big groups coming through heading south. So they'd get spotter planes out and everything. And oh, I enjoyed that. I'd sit up there in my tree house and watch them, and I'd laugh. And so one day I just got through making all my tracks, and I came back and I crawled up in, I was going to crawl up in my tree house to watch them, and I seen the Border Patrol coming down the road, and they got to where all those tracks was, and they kept right on coming. And they came around each side of that tree, and they caught me. And my sisters were in the house, but they wasn't paying attention, I guess. Anyway, the Border Patrol agent took care of the situation. Things were a lot different back then, so he knew right what to do. He pulled off his gun belt and laid it on the ground, pulled off his pants belt, and applied that to my sitting down place. And he paddled me good, and he told me not to do that no more. So,
were the people that were coming through from Mexico, were they just looking for work?
Yes, they were just looking for work.
And so they would just go to towns or something? And
no, they would go to farms and ranches and get a job. back then,
Mm-hmm.
because they were all country people that were coming through,
Mm-hmm.
and they were real good people.
You guys never had troubles?
No, we didn't even have a lock on the door of the house, and we never had troubles with none of them. They would come down the Continental Divide out of Mexico, and there was a spring up on top of the Andes Mountain, and they had a garden there during the summer, and they grew vegetables and stuff there. And then they came on down the mountain range and come into off the big Animas Peak and down into the little Animas range, and then they'd come to our house, and they'd be out of groceries by then, so they'd eat at our house and then go north.
Did pretty much everybody treat the people the same way, or were there some people?
Pretty much everybody did, but just north of us, there was a ranch house there where one of the workers for the Diamond Ace stayed, and his wife didn't like him, and she'd run him off with a gun. But those people were real good to me. The Border Patrol got to where they were catching them pretty frequent, so then I suggested they move down into the mesquites and come up a draw called a Plas Draw that was there. And so they did, and I showed them the way through there. And me and them got on the bank of the wash there, and we dug a little house there. And we packed cross ties from the railroad down, and because they had a stockpile of them there, and we sneaked up there and got them, and went down and covered that little dugout place, and I'd take food down to them. And there was enough room so a small group could go in there and stay all night. They were seasonal workers.
Yeah.
They'd usually come every spring when it got warm enough where they'd come, and then in the winter where they'd go back.
That's what I was thinking. So
But during the spring, summer, and fall, well, there was a steady stream of them going back and forth. Some of them were farmers, and some of them were cowboys from Mexico, so they'd go to the cattle ranches, and then the other guys would go to the farms around Cotton City. They grew cotton by irrigation, of course, and they would run water down the irrigation ditches and then throw pipes over into the rows and water them that way. And
they're getting the water from wells?
yes,
Okay.
the first remembrance I had of it, they were picking it with a machine, and they'd go down and pick it with the machine, and then the wetbacks, we call them back then, the illegals, they would go through and pick it by hand, what the machine missed. So those people who were making good money at it, they would buy a new car about once a year. They would put it in a big cotton sack, we called it. It was about probably, you would put about 200 pounds in there, I think.
And then, so then it had to be, I'm assuming, a cotton gin cleans or separates the
Yes. Yes.
parts that you don't want, or
Yes.
yeah. And do you remember anything about it? There was one here in Rodeo.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was one here in Rodeo, and there was one over in Cotton City when I was a kid. One of the ranchers that, after the railroad moved out, our closest neighbor was a rancher 6 miles away. And he had a cotton farm, and then he had cattle. And he hired me when I was just a kid to go pick cotton. And I worked just as hard as I could all day long, and I picked 15 pounds.
If you had been a wetback, how many pounds do you think they would have picked?
Anywhere from 100 to 150.
Okay. Yeah. But you were just a little kid.
Yeah, I was just a little kid.
Wow. As you got older, what were some of the jobs that you did around other jobs like that?
Well, my dad got to be a fence contractor for the Diamond A's after my granddad sold out. My dad started building fence for the Diamond A's during the Depression.
Mm.
Well, first off, he worked at a mine, and it was supposed to be a gold mine, but there was no gold there, and so they caught on to that pretty quick, and the people that owned it had to shut it down. So then Dad was out of a job, so he went to looking for a job. He was at that time Granddad he had sold his homestead to Granddad, and then Granddad in turn had sold it to the rancher that was there. And then Granddad had moved to Albuquerque, and Dad stayed around and worked at the mine. And then when the mine shut down, the government shut it down. And so then Dad looked around. Dad was camped in Hachita at that time, and so he looked around Hachita for a job around on the ranch. He was asking everybody for a job, and somebody finally told him, "Well, I hear the Diamond A's is hiring," and so then he had $10 left, but gas back then was cheap, so he figured he had enough to go over to the Diamond A's and ask for a job. It was a big cattle company.
Okay.
It was a subsidiary of the Kern County Land Company out of Bakersfield, California. Took in most of the Animas Valley and the Animas Mountain Range and all down in there, and then up to, it went up past Hachita to, and it went up past where the I-10 is now into a place called Cow Springs. And it was a huge outfit. He went down there, and he to get there, you have, at that time you can't now, there's no road there now, but you went south of Hachita, down right by the Mexican border, and you went across the San Luis Pass, and then to the headquarters. So he was going down that way, and he met the superintendent of the company for this area. He happened to be there in the pass, so he, at that time, the thing you did is if you met somebody in the road, well, you pulled over and you visited. So he visited with him, found out who he was, and told him he was looking for a job. And so the guy told him, well, he had lots of fence to build. So Dad said, well, I'd sure like to do that if I could. And so he gave him a job building fence, and Dad built fence there for that company then for the rest of his life. He drove down there with another man, and him and that man went in partners. And that partnership didn't last too long because the guy wanted to get in a hurry and build it and not build it right, and Dad wanted to build it right. So they broke up, and then my older brothers and sisters was my dad's crew. That and a bunch of illegals out of Mexico. And
so how many years did he build fence?
for 30 years. And he passed away on the job. He had blood cancer and lung cancer. So that's why then I grew up and I continued building fence. I grew up until, well, my mother got sick, and she had strokes, and she was bedfast in the hospital in Deming for a long time, and then they gave up on her, and so she went home to the white place to die. and she lasted 2 years, and then she finally passed away there. I was 15, and she passed away. So then, Dad was building a stock bins, a shipping bins down by the Gray Ranch headquarters. So he moved the whole family down there, and we camped out in the school bus that he was camping in. So, of course, there wasn't enough room in there for me. Dad had a school bus, and my older brother had a trailer house. So my sister wanted to go live with one of her sisters for a while. So it was only me. So we camped out up the canyon from that Gray Ranch headquarters, and so I drove an old 4-gate Ford down to the bus stop there to Gray Ranch headquarters and caught the bus and went to school. And we'd leave before daylight usually, and then the country was a lot wetter back then, so coming home a lot of times we'd get to a creek crossing. It was just an old dirt road then, and we'd get to a creek crossing, and the creek would be up too much, so we had to sit until that went down. So we usually got in after dark.
Where did you go to school at?
In Animas. Yeah, sometimes it took me hours to get home, and sometimes I didn't make it to school if the creek was up too much. When I was 16, I quit school.
Okay.
And then I went to work with my dad. And of course, then we camped out wherever we needed to. And so when Christmas morning of 65, my dad passed away. I was 18. Me and my brother was, he was slow in school and he couldn't read or nothing. So then I was in charge of building fence, and I was just a big old kid, so I couldn't really do it. So they hired another one of my brothers to be in charge. And so then my brother that was always slow, he went and he started living with one of my sisters up by Deming. And so me and my older brother, they'd hard to take his place. I was working, and I got to feeling real restless. I wanted to see what the rest of the world was like. And so my brother didn't like it down there because there was no entertainment down there. So we quit, and we went to Deming, and we started working around there. And I worked on cotton farms up there. I cowboyed some, and mostly I was working with my brother at first, my big brother, because I didn't know how to take the road, because I'd been off by myself most of the time. Just at school was the only time I was around anybody other than the family. So him and I were working on a fence down by Columbus, east of Columbus, and it went from the Mexican border north a mile. And we got that almost built, and I was building a gate by myself there where it connected to the border. I was building a gate so the border patrol could go through it. And a man rode up from the other side of the line, a cowboy, and he asked me how much I charged to build a fence, and I told him $200 American. So he did some figuring, and he said, I can afford that. So then he took me and showed me, and he wanted a fence going straight south from there. So then my brother had already left, and he'd gone, so I went and talked to him, and he didn't want to go back down there. he already had another job. So I took that job, and I hired a bunch of people to work for me. I paid them $3 a day, and I got $200. So I finished that fence in about 4 days. So I went off. $200 a mile was good money back then. So I went off on my own then, and I built fence all over the country around Deming. If I wasn't building fence, I was working through Roundup. And then I got with my brother again, and they had the copper mines went on strike. So everybody was looking for a job then. We went over by Tucson, and we worked for a rancher over there, and it was where they were filming the movie The High Chaparral. I was working on that ranch, and so we had a herd of cattle that had ran on us, and they were running down a fence, and we were chasing them, and well, keeping up with them. It's about all we was doing. And so we went by for that movie set, and I didn't think anything about it. And then, probably 3 years ago, I seen that movie, The High Chaparral, and there I went by with a herd of cattle on a horse in the movie. So that's my claim to fame. And then we went up north of Deming to the Silver City area, and we worked for the same guy that we worked for over in Tucson, and he had a ranch over there too. So it was kind of late in the fall by then, and it was already freezing at night. So we worked through his roundup up there, and then he hired us to go build a fence up this one long ridge. And he said it would probably be about a day's ride up there. So we got up real early one morning, and we started riding, and it started snowing. And it was, the snow had got so deep until we had to get on off the top of the ridge and on the outside from the snow, and we rode and rode and rode, and then we had to come back up in the snow because we'd run out of room. And so just as we topped up on the hill, I was pulling the pack horse and riding my horse, of course. And that pack horse started bucking, and he started bucking around the circle, and I was hanging on the best I could. And he bucked the pack off, and then I fell off, and he took off. So my feet were all wet. I had on cowboy boots, and my feet were all wet, and it was probably below zero, I'm not sure. So anyway, we set up camp right there, and during the night my feet got frostbite. So I couldn't really walk the next day or ride or anything. So I stayed there in the teepee tent, and my brother went looking for that fence, and he rode for half a day, and he still didn't find that fence. So he just turned around and come back, and he got back just after dark. So I already had the camp packed up because I thought we was probably going to go on up to the fence. And he said, let's just go back to Deming. So we went back to Deming.
What was Deming like back then as a town?
It was kind of small. It was pretty nice. There wasn't near as many people as there are now. And then it started growing when the retirement people moved in there. But we were already gone from there by then.
And where did you move to next? Where?
Well, my sister sold that place that she had up there that she bought with my dad's life insurance money. she sold that place, and then she bought this place here where we're at now,
Oh, in Rodeo.
in Rodeo.
And about when was that?
1975. My brother worked out of this area, and him and I didn't work anymore by then together.
Yeah.
And so then I was, at that time I forgot. At that time I was driving a mail truck over in Las Cruces.
Oh.
And I was driving it from Las Cruces up to Santa Rosa, New Mexico.
How long did you do that for?
About 5 years. Yeah, when I got out of Vietnam, I went up there to that job after I'm kind of getting way ahead of myself. When I first got out of Vietnam, I went to work for a man running a bulldozer. And so then that job took me up to a mine in the Black Range up by Silver City. And that man I was working for didn't have a very good dozer, and it didn't have enough power to do the job that they wanted it to do. I was just sitting up there, and I wasn't earning any money. So I caught a ride with the man that owned the mine back down to Deming. And on the way back down, why, he pulled over and stopped, and he had a gun on his hip. And so I said, well, what in the world is he going to do now? And we were way up in the middle of nowhere. And he said, now your boss didn't do anything to earn any money. So you're going to tell him that you only worked 5 hours. And I'd worked 20 hours. But he said, you've only worked for 5. You tell him you've only worked for 5 hours. And I told him, no, I'm not going to lie to him. And he reached down and slapped that gun. And he said, you will tell him that. Here's you $20, and you tell him that. So I told him, okay. And I was riding in the back of the pickup truck. And I crawled in the back of the pickup truck, and we rode to Deming. And we pulled into the truck stop there, and we pulled in right next to the county sheriff sitting in his vehicle there. So I just bailed off of that back of that pickup, and I walked up and I punched him, boom! And I told him, here's your $20 back. I'm not going to lie for you. So the sheriff got out and put me in handcuffs and back of the unit, and here we went. Yeah, because on the way then he asked me why I did that. He knew me. And he asked me why I did that. And I told him, well, Sheriff, I was working for your brother, and that guy was going to cheat him. And he paid me money to cheat him, and that's why I got out of there and popped him one. And he said, oh, well. He pulls over and he stopped, and he said, you're not under arrest anymore. But that guy had, while he was arresting me, the sheriff heard that guy tell me that he was going to get me and he was going to kill me. And so he said, what you better do is you probably better go hide for about 6 months. And then all this will blow over. So then I walked down through the country and then cut across to my sister's house and told her what was going on. And I packed up a few groceries and I walked down the gas line road to just the other side of Animas. And I had a friend that had a ranch there, and I walked over to his ranch and told him I'd walked in from Deming and I was looking for a job and wondered if he had one. And he said, yeah, you can go. If you'll go to Head Cheetah and plaster my house for me, I'd appreciate it. And he said, but I haven't got any money. But I got an old car here, I'll trade you so you won't have to walk anymore. So I said, okay. So I went to Head Cheetah and he gave me a sack of potatoes and a little 3-room tin shack to live in. So I was I was living in there, and so there was that rich man that owned the mine. He came looking for me, and he inquired for me at the bar. And I didn't drink, but I had friends there, so they told me that guy was looking for me, and they didn't like his look, so they said they didn't know me. So then I got through plastering that house about that time, and rode back to that rancher's house with him, and he gave me that car, and it had only about an eighth of a tank of gas. So then I went to Cotton City and went to work for a farmer over there, cutting cotton stalks. And I made enough money out of that, so I went to Animas and bought some gas and a sack of potatoes. So I went to the Animas Mountain, and it was like November, so I got to the turnoff to the Animas Mountain, and it was snowing pretty heavy. So I figured that'd cover up my tracks, so I went up to the Animas Mountain and concealed that old car, and then went up to the top of the Animas Mountain, and I went on the other side and to a place, Bear Canyon it's called, Bear Canyon Spring. And I stayed there the rest of the winter then. And then I came down and it all died down. I had that sack of potatoes to begin with. And then I took some baling wire with me, and I set out a snare line. And whatever I caught with that, that's what I ate. Between that and then I knew, of course, that I could eat cactus. You burn the spines off of the stickers off the cactus, and you can eat that, and it's real nutritious. I cooked it over a campfire. And there's several kinds of cactus you can eat. You can eat cholla cactus, you can eat barrel cactus, and you can eat prickly pear cactus. And even in the winter you can eat it. So that's mostly what I ate. And then with my little trap line I caught rabbits and stuff and ate that. Yeah, I came back down and winter was over, and I got in my car and I went to Douglas, Arizona, through the Geronimo Trail. And I filled up with gas in Douglas, and then I got a job in Douglas. And I was still a little nervous, so I stayed in Awtrey for a few months, and then I moved into the Roy Hotel there in Douglas. And I stayed there, and I worked there, probably a year. I was driving a truck. I was hauling hay for a wholesale hay guy. And then he went broke or something. I can't remember now what. But anyway, then I went to work for a guy hauling grain. And so I drove the truck to just the other side of Chiricahua Mountains to a place called Chiricahua. It was there then. I don't know whether it still is or not now. But anyway, I went over there and I loaded up with grain and I hauled it to Phoenix. And I did that for 3 or 4 months is all, I think. And then I was coming back one night and, one evening late, and it got to be night, and at that time I-10 wasn't completed. So yeah, I had to drive down through Benson, Arizona. And I just got to the top of the hill and the air brakes went out on that truck. So I went way down into Benson, and there was a vacant lot there at that time, and I whirled that into that lot and slid around in circles till it finally stopped. So I got out, and the cops were all there then. And so I told them what happened, and they said, well, call your boss and see what he wants to do. So they loaned me a phone, and I called my boss, and he said, you drive that thing home. I told him, but it hasn't got any brakes. He said, oh, the emergency brake will work. So here I went, and I went from Benson to Bisbee and through the Bisbee Tunnel and down the other side. And I got to the other side, and by then I was so scared and just sitting there shaking, and it was in the middle of the night. And I left his key where I was supposed to, and I walked off and left that truck, and I never looked back.
So where did you go from there?
I went to Tuncumcari. Tuncumcari, New Mexico, and I worked for, one of my cousins had a kind of an interest in a mail truck run up there, a contract mail truck. And I worked there for 5 years for that company. And at first I drove from Tuncumcari to Amarillo and back every day. And then one of the guys didn't show up to a place called Pastura. He drove the mail truck out there. So I drove that truck until he got going again. And then I started, one of the mail truck drivers quit, so I started driving from Tuncumcari down to about the Ancho turnoff on 54 to go to the little town of Ancho. And I'd slide seats with him, and I'd turn around and go back to Tuncumcari. And then that driver quit. So then I moved to Las Cruces, and I drove a truck there for the rest of the time, and I lasted about 5 years on that job. And then my route, I went from Las Cruces up through Alamogordo and up to that Ancho turnoff. And it was in the middle of winter and snowy, and I got to Tularosa, and they had a roadblock there, and they told me, well, you can't go up 54 because it's got 22 inches of ice on the road. And I told them, well, I got the mail here, I gotta go. So they said, well, okay, go ahead if you can handle it. So I went, and the other truck couldn't come any further than that Ancho turnoff because it was too snowy. So I went up there, and I slid seats with him and drove the other truck back. And I got almost down to Carasosa, still in the mountains. So, and the drive shaft went out on that truck, and the snow was about 3 foot deep on each side of the road. And so then I got out, and I took a stick and I dug through the snow and made me a little ice cave. And I was in that thing shaking and shivering. So then I was planning on staying all night there and trying to walk in the next morning to Carasosa. And here come a set of headlights over the hill. So I jumped out in the middle of the road and started waving. And it was some people from North Dakota, I believe. And they knew how to drive in the snow, so it wasn't bothering them. So I got a ride on into Carasosa and called my boss and asked him what to do. And he said, well, how did you get to a phone? I told him I just left the truck up there. And he said, no, you can't leave that mail truck and all that. And I said, well, what else could I have done? He said, well, I guess you couldn't have done nothing else. He knew a mechanic there that had done work for him before, so he woke that mechanic up, and the mechanic picked me up, and we went up there. And of course, he had a nice four-wheel drive and all that, so we pulled that truck back into Karasosa, and he put a new drive shaft in it. And then I finally got down into Las Cruces again about 3 o'clock that afternoon. And so then I got a few hours sleep and went back and done it again.
When did you move to Rodeo?
1970. Well, my sister moved here in 1975. And then I came in the fall of 75 because I got to where I couldn't drive that truck anymore because I couldn't stay awake. I was having issues with Vietnam and stuff, and I couldn't sleep, and so I was driving that mail truck and then working during the day just to keep my head on. And I got to where I couldn't do it anymore, so I quit. And I came to Rodeo, and my sister lived here then, so I moved in with her.
I was going to ask you what Rodeo was like in the 70s then.
It was a nice, quiet little town. And I met my wife then in January of 76. And so I was acquainted with her about 6 months and married her.
She was from Rodeo?
No.
No.
She was from San Antonio, Texas.
Well, how did you meet her when you were here?
Well, she was married to another guy, and that didn't work out, and so she was pregnant with her second boy. And so her dad couldn't take care of her because he didn't have a very good job. So he asked one of his sisters to let her move in with her. So his sister's husband was a truck driver for construction. So then the job took him to Rodeo. And so then it took him out of Rodeo, and they told Wanda she couldn't go with them, I guess. So she was living over there across the road here in a trailer. And she was just about to have that baby, and she had another little 4-year-old kid. And so my sister heard about her, so she went over there and gathered her up and brought her over here because she would have a way to go to the doctor then. And
where would you go to the doctor back then? Would you go down to Douglas or?
No, when she started to have the baby, we took her into Lordsburg because there was a doctor there then, and that doctor refused to help her because she didn't have any money and stuff. So then I was all mad, and I was raising heck, and they called the state police on me. And so the state police asked me what was going on, and I told them. And they said, well, can't you pay for it? And I told them, no, I don't even know this woman. So he said, well, we'll get her an ambulance. So then they took her to Silver in the ambulance. And so we followed her up there. And so then when we dropped her off, we made sure she was in the hospital and everything. And then so we started coming back down, and we just got out of Silver, and the stupid pickup quit. Oh. And the battery had got a hole in it somewhere or another. So we didn't have any batteries, so I started it down the hill. We just happened to be on the hill, and I let it roll down the hill. And I started it and ran it on the alternator, and the alternator quit. So then it was quitting, and the battery was running down and all that stuff. And so I shut off all the lights, and I drove without any lights from from up there almost to Silver, all the way down here to Rodeo.
Mm. Mm.
And I got here, when I got here it was daylight, but I made it in.
And the baby was born all right and everything?
Yeah, then we got the pickup fixed and we went back and she was in there having the baby and of course I was just flat give out tired. So I was standing there and I guess I looked like I was in a daze. I looked kind of dorky anyway, you know. And so the doctor said, well, you've been knowing this for 9 months. What are you looking so shocked now for? And I said, oh, I don't know that woman at all. She's not my wife. Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, right. That's why you're so concerned. And so anyway, then 6 months later, she was my wife.
What's different about rodeo from then in the 70s?
A lot of people have moved in since then.
So it's bigger now than it was from 76?
Yeah, the town of Rodeo is probably not bigger. There's probably less people right here in town, but the area, back then they wanted to start a fire department and an ambulance service, and they had to have 200 people in a 10 square mile, and they didn't have it. So they, I think they went to the graveyard and borrowed some people. The highway now is a lot busier and it's not near as countrified as it was. Back then when we first got married and the kids was all little, we had a pig that he just run loose over here and we fed him. He was just like a dog. Mm-hmm. And so he was a kid's playmate and the kids would ride him around all over the place. And so we'd all get together and we'd walk to the store and the pig would follow us over there. So the kids had trained the pig to stay on this side of the highway. And somebody seen that pig go over there and they said, hey, somebody's pig got away. And the lady that owned the store then, she said, no, that's just the Awtrey say. That pig comes with them all the time.
Are there a lot of people that have stayed in rodeo, families that you've known since?
Oh yeah, Junior Gomez and all his sisters and stuff. They've been here the whole time. And a bunch of the old people that was here have passed away.
I mean, when you look at rodeo today, just looking out at the buildings, does it look about the same as when you first came?
Some of the buildings are gone. The old hotel was here then still. And the old depot was here then. And so all that's gone now.
Yeah.
And a lot of the section houses were that the track workers lived in, they were still here then.
Yeah.
And all that's gone. It looks quite a lot.
What did they do with the depot?
I think they moved it. Didn't they move it to Bill Klutz? Well, I know his granddad tore it down. He had it leased and he tore it down because it was getting real rickety.
And there used to be a hotel over by where the store is now.
Yeah, by that storage place.
Yeah.
The Klutz on, there was a hotel right there.
And did they get business just from the train, or was it from the road, or both? Or?
From the train and the road both. Yeah. Some famous people who stayed there. The writer, Zane Grey,
yeah,
he stayed there and he wrote a book about the rodeo Portal area. John Prater, he was the rancher over at White Sands when the government took it over, and he got in a big fight with them about it. And he owned the hotel at that time, and his business partner, her name was Myrtle Dean, I think. So he stayed there, and one of the things I've done too, since I drove that mail truck, I got interested in locks, and I went to a couple of locksmith schools and become a locksmith. So I went, Mrs. Dean was friends with us, and so she asked me if I could open that safe for her. So I went over, and every day after work I'd go over and try and open that safe. It was one of those big old-fashioned ones. And so I'd go over there and work every evening for about a week, and I finally figured out the combination and opened it. And she thought too that there might be some old money in there and stuff. And there wasn't. There were some old deeds that John Prather had in there.
Hmm.
But it was pretty fun.